Welcome to another episode of the When to Pick series. Today's episode is on a jungler who trolls the battlefield, Jungle Trundle. Trundle is amongst the strongest junglers in the game, with incredible power in all aspects of jungling, while also packing tons of utility. He's a bruiser that can single-handedly melt enemy tanks and deter entire teams with his wall. There is no jungle aspect that Trundle is lacking in, although he is weakest in clearing speed. He is arguably the strongest jungle duelist in the game, as he can both slug it out in a fight and outmaneuver most of his opponents. He is a very active jungler, and some players may find themselves overwhelmed by his playstyle. He is notable for being able to cripple other bruisers and tanks, and being nearly unkillable in skirmishes. Trundle is a jungler that can be picked first without completely negative issues, but it may encourage his opponents to avoid picking champions that get countered by him, and thus render some of his strengths less useful. Even so, he's a competent pick even if he doesn't end up countering anybody, and thus first pick Trundle is safe. To that end, Trundle can absolutely terrorize certain team comps, so it might be best just to save him to last pick. Trundle absolutely demolishes teams with a singular tank, as his ultimate will render them useless by draining their stats. He is also an absolute horror for team compositions that do not have impressive mobility or blinks, as his wall will cripple them in every fight and can single-handedly be the reason they lose. As such, he is strong against any champion that has defensive steroids, such as Shyvana, Rammus, and Leona, and against champions that rely on movement speed such as Udyr, Rumble, and Singed, or have no movement speed at all like Mordekaiser and Sion. Trundle doesn't really have any weaknesses, so most of what can be done against him is to make him less effective, to the point where his contributions are merely average or minor. He is not very effective against team compositions that are heavy on blinks, as his wall cannot be used to protect his teammates or to be used offensively against them. Champions such as Ahri, LeBlanc, and Zed are nightmares for Trundle to deal with. Trundle's damage tends to be on the lower end, but it works wonders on his usual opponents, like physical champions, since they wouldn't be able to fight back and just take his punishment. This, though, means that sustained magic users and strong magic kiters can be hellish for him to face off against, as he can't cripple them and outdo their damage. It's best to avoid fighting champions like Swain as Trundle. Trundle is a very maneuverable champion and can deny his opponents their unmaneuverability at the same time. This makes him a very powerful pick in kite-heavy team compositions. His wall can be leveled up in ranks and its cooldown lowered with items, so it can be spammed in fights and disengages. It makes him work well with champions such as Singed, Ashe, and Janna, and this in turn makes him a strong champion in protect compositions, as his wall can be used to create space between whoever he's protecting and the enemy team, and at the same time cripple whatever frontline champion got to his carry and then just murder them. As it was already mentioned, he's pretty pointless against heavy sustained magic team compositions, so it's best to try to avoid those. His builds are mostly static, and he does tend to lean towards a few certain core items when he focuses on tankiness or damage. In most cases, he does well with cooldown reduction and health, and due to the synergy it possesses with the passive, Spirit Visage is one of the most powerful items on Trundle. As far as offensive choices go, he favors Trinity Force with a Sheen Start or a Blade of the Rune King, as both make his auto attack bite spam incredibly deadly. Now let's go over some of the things we learned. Trundle is a very powerful jungler that can render most tanks useless with his ultimate and cripple movement speed reliant champions. He also excels in all aspects of jungling and is arguably the best jungle duelist in the game. He has no real weaknesses, but can be made less effective if the enemy makes the right champion decisions. He is rather ineffective against champions that are heavy on blinks, and cannot do much to stop them or fight them. He fits kite team compositions, as his wall can be used repeatedly in a fight to deter the enemy team and secure the retreat. He is also a strong bodyguard in protect team compositions, as his wall will create space between his MVP and the enemy team, and he can cripple them with his ultimate and bite, so they really can't do damage to his MVP anyways. And he has a lot of defensive item options but only a few offensive ones, with Spirit Visage kind of being core in whatever build he takes anyways. As a personal recommendation, he is by far one of my favorite champions, and his intense jungling can overwhelm opponents, especially those who are not used to facing a juggernaut such as him, who is both powerful in defense and in offense, and who comes packing with a couple of grim debuffs.